Ja, moin moin, herzlich willkommen zum NOlympia-Kongress, etwas Besseres als Olympia. Ich bin Franziska vom AStA der Uni Hamburg und sage vorweg kurz ein paar Worte zu dem Kongress und der aktuellen Situation. Es geht ja auch in den letzten Tagen nochmal Schlag auf Schlag in der Auseinandersetzung zwischen Olympia und eben etwas Besseres als Olympia. Zahlreiche Wissenschaftlerinnen der Hamburger Hochschulen haben Kritik an den Kommerzspielen in den letzten Tagen nochmal veröffentlicht in dem Positionspapier Olympiakritik aus der Wissenschaft. Das Internationale Olympische Komitee richtet seinen Markenrechtswahn jetzt sogar selbst gegen die Olympia-Befürworter mit dem Verbot, das Logo Feuer und Flamme nach dem Referendum weiter benutzen zu dürfen gegenüber der Stadt Hamburg. Und die MOPO-Umfrage in der letzten Woche hat ergeben, dass nur noch 52% der Hamburger und Hamburgerinnen für Olympia sind und gar nur 3% der Hamburger und Hamburgerinnen dem Finanzkonzept von Olaf Scholz glauben. Ja, und genau in der Zeit, also jetzt kommen wir ja auf den Kongress zusammen, um gegen diese emotionale Stimmungsmache von Senat und Handelskammer, von denen Kritik, Argumente und Fakten auszutauschen, zu erarbeiten und gemeinsam zu diskutieren, was eigentlich die Alternative, etwas Besseres als Olympia und die Perspektive unserer gemeinsamen Aktivitäten ist. Ab Montag dann direkt, ab dem 26.10. werden die Unterlagen zu dem Referendum an die Hamburger Haushalte verschickt und es ist eine nicht zu beantragen, also eine sofortige Briefwahl. Das heißt, wir können dann direkt abstimmen, was wiederum bedeutet, dass die neuen Eindrücke, auch die neuen Erkenntnisse, die vertiefte Kritik, die wir uns jetzt über das Wochenende erarbeiten, zügig auch verbreitet werden sollen. Deswegen rufe ich euch jetzt schon mal auf, auch direkt nach dem Wochenende in Gespräche mit Kollegen, Kolleginnen, Freunden, Freundinnen, Nachbarn, Verwandten zu treten und euch das gerne ganze Infomaterial, das wir draußen schon aufgebaut haben, auch mitzunehmen und flächendeckend zu verteilen. Ja, noch ein paar weitere eher organisatorische Ansagen. Das endgültige Programm findet ihr jetzt ausgedruckt entweder vor euch oder auch dann später nochmal am Infotisch. Vielleicht gleich nochmal eine E-Mail-Liste rumgeben, in der ihr euch gerne eintragen könnt, wenn ihr dann weitere Informationen nochmal zugeschickt bekommen wollt, wie beispielsweise Videomaterial oder nochmal die Aufrufe zu weiteren Aktivitäten in den nächsten beiden Wochen oder darüber hinaus vielleicht auch noch eben zu Olympia. Dann noch die Information, dass die Veranstaltung heute Abend aufgenommen wird, aber das wird wahrscheinlich nicht nur hier vorne das Podium sein. Also ihr könnt euch auch dann verstecken, wenn ihr euch eigentlich aufgenommen werden wollt. Und zuletzt müssen wir leider unsere Mitstreiterinnen aus London und Paris entschuldigen. Aus London ist der Kollege kurzfristig erkrankt und in Paris wird aktuell gerade das Anti-Olympische Komitee gegründet und da sind die Kolleginnen und Kollegen sehr eingebunden. Genau, aber wir haben trotzdem interessante Gäste aus verschiedenen Städten bei uns und damit übergebe ich an das Podium.
Yeah, so hello everyone and welcome to our panel discussion how to stop the stealing of the IOC. That's the main topic. And for that panel discussion, a very warm welcome to our guests on the panel. So to my right side, we've got from the No Boston Olympics 2024, Kelley, Gosset and Chris Dempsey. Concerned with the Winter Games 2022, we've got Tomasz Lesniak from Krakow and Willi Rehberg from Salzburg. And of course from the Hamburg NOlympia movement, we've got, and from the Artur of the University of Hamburg, we've got Artur Brückmann here. So thanks a lot for joining us tonight here. Just to give you a short overview what will await you tonight. At first we will have some small inputs about what locally happened at the specific movements in Boston, Krakow, in Munich. And after this short input there will be possibility for you to ask some specific questions about the movements locally. And after that we're going to broaden the view and open the discussion about is there a better alternative than Olympia along with the IOC, and what can we do about it by connecting all the movements together? And yeah, so you're all invited to participate and discuss along with us. So yeah, for the inputs, the main questions to lead along is what were the arguments of the local governments and how did the whole movement start? What were your experiences during the whole process and which kind of resistance you had to oppose, and also which arguments were the ones counting for the people, and yeah, in the end we will hear that later on, making the difference. So I don't know if we want to start with our guest from Boston, Kelley or Chris? Okay.
Good evening, hello. It's great to be in Hamburg. Thank you very much for hosting us here. And we are very glad to be here and hopefully to contribute to the discussion that's happening in Hamburg. Obviously, it will be up to the people of Hamburg how this and if this moves forward. But if the experience in Boston can provide a different perspective and a different or a better understanding of what the Olympic process is, then we will have found this trip, I think, very worthwhile. So I'm Chris Dempsey. I was one of the co-chairs of No Boston Olympics, and we started more than 2 years ago now, about 2 years ago now, in November of 2013. I'll fast forward to January of 2015, just this last January, when the United States Olympic Committee named Boston as the host city. Very similar to the process that was happening here in Germany, where it was going to be either Hamburg or Berlin. They named Boston in January 2015, and the plan was from the committee was to move forward with that bid through 2017. But with the work of No Boston Olympics and many other groups in Boston, we were able to draw more attention to the bid. And this last July, at the end of July, Boston 2024, which was the bidding group, and the USOC jointly agreed to end the bid. So there was a very intense 6 or 7 month period from January 2015 until July of 2015. I'll talk a little bit about my background and how I got involved, and then hand it over to Kelley, and then we'll talk maybe just a little bit more about some of the main arguments in Boston. So my background was that I was born and raised in Boston. I worked in government at the state level. Then I went to business school. I worked on political campaigns, and I also worked in the business world for a large consulting firm. And it was during that time I was working for the consulting firm that we started No Boston Olympics and began to do that on sort of a part-time basis. It became a full-time volunteer job beginning in January or February of 2015 after that USOC decision.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having us. You are the nicest people, and we've had such a wonderful week already, so we're really grateful to be here. I will be very quick. My background is I'm a lawyer who works on advocacy issues for low-income people in Massachusetts. And I joined the Boston Olympics July of last year. When I learned more about the Olympic process, I think like most people, at first I thought it sounded really cool, and I love sports, and it's an interesting idea, and then I learned about the financial underbelly of the Olympics, and to echo a lot of Chris's concerns, I wanted to get involved and wanted to make some impact in this conversation. So I joined, our third co-chair could not be here, wanted to be, and we have been, I guess, successful in our effort, along with a lot of other wonderful people in Boston, about discussing the Olympics. So I'll be really brief because I really want to hear from you guys and your specific questions, but that's kind of how I got involved.
Maybe I'll just lay out the three main arguments that we made, and then we can get back to more discussion of what happened in Boston, if there's interest. We really stuck to, I think, three overall arguments, and they were pretty simple at the end of the day. The first is that the Olympics are very expensive. They take a significant amount of resources. I know the bid in Hamburg is estimated at, I think, 11.2 billion euros. That's roughly what it would have been in Boston. The boosters, the proponents were claiming that they can do it for a little bit less, maybe $9 billion or $10 billion. But it was almost inevitable that that number was going to increase. And in fact, we saw it increase as time went on just through the bidding process alone. So it's just a significant amount of resources and very, very costly, very expensive. The second is that despite that significant investment of resources, Olympics in other cities have not proven to create economic development. So the Olympics have not left cities better off. They don't have more jobs, they don't have higher productivity for the workers in those cities. And if you think about that, it kind of makes sense, right? The things that increase an economy are investments in education, in infrastructure, and all the things that sort of make us better on a day-to-day basis. Building stadiums that are going to sit empty, or velodromes, or aquatic centers are not things that are going to increase economic productivity. And then finally, and this was an important issue for us, we believe that Olympics have enormous opportunity costs. And that's an economic term that's common in the US and in English, and it just really means the cost of the other things that you could be doing with all that time and attention and resources. So we constantly talked about the fact that Boston needed investment in housing, it needed investment in transit, it needed investment in education, but that those things were going to be put at risk because we were going to be focused on building the velodrome and building the stadium and making sure that the opening ceremonies was the opening ceremonies that we wanted to show the rest of the world. At the end of the day, those were not important priorities to people in Massachusetts, and I think we were able to make the case that those priorities were not enhanced by the Olympics, but actually put at risk by the Olympics. And I think that's been the story in other cities around the world. I think that's very consistent with history. So those were our three main messages, and as the evening goes on, I'll be happy to talk in more detail about what sort of tactics we use and other issues that we raised. I will say, and I'll talk more about this later, I see many similarities between Hamburg and Boston, both in the cities themselves and also in the way the process is being conducted. And I'll talk more about that later.
So, thanks a lot. Okay, then, so I'm a hand of it.
Good evening and thanks for the invitation. I will talk a little bit about application process and our fight in Krakow, Poland. The small difference between Hamburg, Boston and Krakow, but important one, is that there was no plan for referendum in Krakow. So the local government started by making decision that we will host the Olympics. The same with Parliament in May 2013. The decision of local government was taken in October 2013. They just said we are going to participate in Olympics, and this is when our initiative emerged. So our first goal was to organize a referendum, and we were sure that it will be difficult to organize it by grassroots mobilization, and that we should rather put pressure on the local government so they take decision to organize referendum, and ultimately we were successful. But there were, like in case of your initiatives, similar arguments. So basically, development of a city shouldn't be based on mega projects like Olympics, but rather systematic investment in education, healthcare, housing, transportation. And the second argument, which is, I think, the strongest one and has a strong empirical basis and is convincing for citizens that every Olympics leads to cost overrun, so the actual cost is much higher than estimations. It's 179% higher than estimations on average. This leads, of course, to debt, and that leads to austerity, simply speaking. Also, one important context to add here is that 2013 is also the year when we had the strongest cuts in education. In fact, we were running a movement against cuts in education, against privatization of school canteens, school closures, firing teachers, cutting budgets of particular schools. When the decision about involvement in Olympics was taken by the local government. So this was also important for people that in the context of austerity, the government takes decision to involve in mega projects. And also one important context is the fact that Poland organized Euro 2012, and after that we still have problems with paying the debts that cities have after building stadiums and using these stadiums. They are simply not used. Like Krakow built 2 stadiums for 200 million euros, and they were not even used for Euro 2012 because games were organized in other cities, which is like no comments. So, I think we can move on and then discuss like particular arguments that like the local government had in favor of organizing Olympics and what was our response to that maybe later or I don't know if you want me to develop.
Yeah, I want to make just a quick point because you're mainly from Hamburg, I think, so maybe you know some of the points. I want to start with April the 8th. It was the date when a new coalition treaty was formed by the party of the Social Democrats and the Green Party. And in this treaty there is one sentence which we often discuss about, and the sentence says, quote, "The Games can be a great community experience for the Hamburg citizens, which overcomes many borders, young and old, native and immigrated, poor and rich." And I think you can show the specific characteristics of what the government tried to do with bidding for the hosting the Olympic Games. Because when you look at the different aspects in this sentence, you can see there are many problems regarding these parts of the sentence. For example, young and old. Hamburg is one of the cities with the highest rates of old age poverty in Germany. When you look at the aspect of native and immigrated, Hamburg is ignoring a group of refugees, the group Lampedusa in Hamburg, for now many years, and many refugees have to live in tents in these really cold nights at the moment. And when you look at the aspect of poor and rich, Hamburg has 400,000 people out of 1.7 million inhabitants that live below the poverty line, while we have 42,000 millionaires living in Hamburg. So there are really big political problems you have to deal with, but what they want to do is to overpaint these real problems with a big mega event. and not to deal with the problem, because they are part of the cause of this problem. That's one point why the government said, okay, we want to make the Olympic Games to continue the austerity policy and give people a big event where they can cheer for the nation, for the city. Second point is that on April the 11th there was the foundation of the NOlympics network in Hamburg. There were about 140 people, and they made a resolution with the main aspects of this network. So one point was, of course, the points of critique at the Olympic Games. It says that we don't want the costs in the billions of euro. We don't want rising rent. We don't want to relocate the harbor industry. No selling off the city to big businesses. We don't want a high performance sport, which ultimately ruins athletes through doping, and we don't want an event in the city which we only can watch on TV. And this was the one aspect. The other aspect, the name of the network was NOlympics Hamburg, something better than Olympic Games, and this was set by some points we set in this resolution. Yes, to strengthening inclusive school and recreational sports, more social housing, a city where everyone is welcome, and where the needs of the residents are taken seriously. So this was what our network tried to do and tried to fight for, and I would say, in part of as a reaction to all this critique to the Olympic Games, the Hamburg organizational committee of the Olympic Games tried to integrate some of the critique already before hosting the Olympic Games. They said, okay, we want Olympic Games to be sustainable, we would produce real legacy, we will make a climate neutral event, and we will make it with a Hanseatic, humble touch, bescheidene Spiele, they say. All promises which never were met in other hostings of the Olympic Games. And so they say we will make it better than everyone else. But the main points why they say, okay, we as a city, we need hosting the Olympic Games is because we will build a new part of the city. We will connect the south of the city to the center of the city by build a city on the Kleine Grasburg. It's an island between the south and the center apparently. And we will, for example, renew the public transport system. And an argument which has been said very often is that we, as Hamburg, will get money from the federal government. And every time the federal government don't look at Hamburg when it's giving money to other regions in Germany. But when we have the Olympic Games, then we will get the money, for example, to renew the main station in Hamburg. And so that's what they said, what they want to do. And they also said if the IOC really means the 2020 reform agenda, then the only choice could be Hamburg, because Hamburg will make a small games located in the center of the city. They say it's logic that only Hamburg can be the perfect candidate. And maybe last point, and then we can move on, is that they really tried to get out of getting into argumentation with the negative side. There was a sports conference in June where they all the campaigners and the advertisement corporations, they said, okay, we must depoliticize the debate about the Olympic Games. We have to target the emotions of the population, and I think that's what you clearly can see when you go into a bus, when you go into a train. Everywhere is the flame symbol, Chris always says the glossy images. You have it in Hamburg everywhere. Where they say, okay, it's for Hamburg, it's for Germany, it's a once in a lifetime moment, and don't think about all the cost things, and just be cheerful to have the pride to host the games. And so then that's one of the main points we try to meet as the NOlympics network. That we said, okay, we are the ones that have facts about past Olympic Games. We are the ones that have arguments, and very important, we are the ones that have visions for another city, a city that is worth to live, a social, a democratic, ecological city, and we can make points where we can show that when the Olympic Games would come to Hamburg, it would be bad regarding these aspects, and we have alternative solution for that. So I think that's what we can discuss in the next round, maybe.
Es wird nirgends so viel gelogen als wie bei Olympiabewerbungen. Glauben Sie, dass einem im Zuge von 5 Bewerbungen sichtlich gealterten kritischen Bürger aus Salzburg, aus der schönsten Stadt der Welt? Vom Beginn der Bewerbung um Olympische Winterspiele 2006 bis zu der Bewerbung Münchens um die Olympischen Winterspiele 2022 war ich überall dabei. Am Anfang noch als Referent im Bewerbungskomitee für Umweltschutz, entsandt vom österreichischen Alpenverein. Dann kam 2010 mit dem Versuch, ein Öko-Olympia zu gründen, das vertraglich mit der Bewerbungsgesellschaft, mit Stadt und Land einen Vertrag machen kann. Was Ähnliches ist gerade vor einigen Tagen in Hamburg passiert. Und dann kam eigentlich das Wichtigste, nämlich das Bürgerbegehren Salzburg für die Olympiade 2014. Und da waren wir, wie wir in Österreich sagen, 5 Mandeln. Wir waren nicht 5 Mandeln, es waren noch 2 Damen dabei. Aber wir haben zu 5 ohne Geld ein Bürgerbegehren in der Landeshauptstadt zustande gebracht. Das musste der Bürgermeister durchziehen und wir haben mit 61% gewonnen. Ich sage das nicht nur aus Stolz, sondern ich sage das, weil das für Sie unerhört wichtig ist, meine Damen und Herren. Sie haben noch die Chance zu bewirken. Jeder von Ihnen soll 20 Leute überzeugen, dass Olympia ein Krampf ist. Und dann haben Sie eine Chance, dass dieser Zirkus Ihnen erspart bleibt. Denn wenn der Zirkus mal losgeht, ich habe das deutlich bewiesen, wie in Belgien oder wo, dann gibt es kein Zurück mehr. Diese Bewerbung, das gewinnt eine eigene Dynamik, da kann man nicht aufhalten. Jeder wird sich ausreden, ja, das muss wegen Olympia gemacht werden. Und da gibt es kein Zurück mehr. Wenn ich das richtig verstanden habe, wurde hier gefragt, nach den Argumenten, warum kommt es zur Bewerbung? Bin ich da richtig? Es wurde angeführt, ja, was die Städte alles sagen, wir brauchen Olympia, wenn dann Verkehr und Hubschrauberlandeplatz und was weiß ich. Nein, das ist alles zu vergessen. Olympia wird aus ganz anderen Gründen gemacht, meine Damen und Herren. Es sind die Lobbyisten, es sind die Berater, es sind die Interessengruppen, die aus dem Hintergrund kommen und schauen, dass Olympische Spiele sind. Ein Beispiel, Olympia 2014. Olympia 2010 ist Salzburg ganz grausig eingefahren, wie man sagt. Das wurde abgelehnt und wir haben gesagt, nie mehr Olympia. Und dann sollte im Innergebirge, im Salzburger Land, ein neuer Skilift gebaut werden, in einem sehr sensiblen Gebiet. Und da gab es eine Umweltverträglichkeitsprüfung. Nie im Leben wird das gelingen. Und dann sind wir auf die Idee gekommen, aber wenn Olympia kommt, dann müssen wir genau dort die Herrenabfahrt machen. Und aus diesem Grund allein ist dann der Druck auf die Landeshauptstadt gekommen von Innergebirge, damit sich Salzburg um die Olympischen Winterspiele bewirbt. Und das Olympische Komitee, das IOC, das betreibt ein Geschäft, hat über 3 Milliarden Dollars auf seinen Konten liegen. Und das IOC hat natürlich eine Freude, wenn sich viele Städte bewerben. Und jede dieser Staaten, ich spreche jetzt von Sommerspielen, muss mindestens 50 bis 100 Millionen Euro in die Hand nehmen, um überhaupt durch den Bewerbungsprozess durchzukommen. Ob sie dann die Olympiade kriegen oder nicht. Ja, ich könnte Ihnen stundenlang erzählen, ich würde sagen, kommen Sie alle morgen in den Raum S7, nachhaltige Entwicklung durch Umweltbelastung. Für diese Sache wurde ich eigentlich bereits vor einer Woche von den Organisatoren engagiert. Danke zunächst.
Yeah, so thanks a lot to you guys. I don't know if already some questions occur from the audience. If not, just give me a hand. Okay, over there.
And I just want to know if, like in the other cities, there were similar programs, similar advertising, like this enormous amount, or if that's something you also are curious about.
Wenn ihr Fragen auf Deutsch stellen wollt, das kriegen wir auch übersetzt, also keine Scheu. Yeah, so should we make a little collection of 2 or 3 questions they are?
Sie meinten gerade, dass eine Stadt für das Aufnahmeverfahren 50 bis 100 Millionen Euro benötigt. Können Sie erklären, woraus dann oder was für Geld gemacht werden muss?
Ja, also ich glaube, man kann ohne Mikro da reden. Hört man mich? Ja? Okay. Was mit diesen 50 bis 100 Millionen passiert? Ich sage das jetzt vorsichtig, ohne dass ich nicht anstehe. Wenn Sie sich den heutigen Spiegel, auch morgen ist er neuer, wenn Sie sich den heutigen Spiegel kaufen, dann lesen Sie eine Titelgeschichte, dass hier einiges Geld geflossen ist, um das Sommermärchen 2006 nach Deutschland zu holen. Also ein Teil dieses Geldes, mein Herr, geht in irgendwelche dunklen Kanäle. Selbst in Salzburg, das mit 20 Millionen ausgekommen ist, hat es anschließend einen parlamentarischen Untersuchungsausschuss gegeben, der lange gedacht hat, es wurde der Generalsekretär des österreichischen Olympischen Komitees zu einer mehrjährigen Haftstrafe verurteilt, hier noch abgibt. Also ein Teil dieses Geldes, wie viel auch immer, geht irgendeinen krummen Weg. Der andere Teil wird einfach für alle möglichen unnützen Dinge aufgewandt. Es wird in der Welt herumgereist, es muss in Beijing ein Kongress veranstaltet werden, dass der letzte Chinese weiß, dass wir in Salzburg Curling veranstalten. Wir haben 20 Millionen aufgewendet und dann wurde uns gesagt, ja, ihr spinnt doch. Unter 50 Millionen haben wir überhaupt keine Chance. Aber wenn Sie Interesse haben, ich Ich habe das ganze Material auf dem Untersuchungsausschuss. Es sind ein paar hundert Seiten. Wenn Sie mir Ihre E-Mail-Adresse geben, dann können Sie alles lesen. Die schönen Wege des Bewerbungsgeldes Salzburgs.
So I'm afraid your political and economic elites are more skillful than ours in public relations and advertising, because before the whole referendum campaign started and before they decided to organize a referendum, we had a quite funny, from our perspective, scandal, because husband of the lady who was responsible for who was the boss of the organizing committee, the husband met with a journalist on a petrol station, and he said to the journalist that there is quite many negative articles about Olympics, and he would like more positive ones to appear in the press. And the journalist published the petrol station meeting. So, this was the start of the referendum. When the referendum itself, referendum campaign started, they decided to employ a professional public relations guy who ran a campaign under slogans such as Olympics is a method for air pollution, Olympics is a method for job creation, and so on and so on. So we sued them that they are telling lies about the pollution, because it was the easiest thing we could win. The claim was that we will get more funds from the government for fighting air pollution, like Krakow is the second air polluted city in Europe. Due to the Olympic process, and that it will be easier to get EU funds. Of course, we got to the papers where the government was saying that it will be the same, like you have to apply for EU funds in the same process as you were not bidding for Olympics. But the court said that this statement is neither true nor false, because you cannot predict that we will not get more funds for the pollution. So we lost in the court, but this case was discussed for most of the referendum campaign. So ultimately we won, in a sense, citizens who thought this ruling of the court is quite funny.
So in Boston, we were up against the most, successful advertising campaign folks in the city. And they devoted a ton of money to making, as Chris says often, glossy images. Lovely commercials, almost like public service announcements, similar, to what's happening here, to describe the benefit of the Olympics. There was no way we were going to counteract that. That would be impossible. We were outspent, what, 1,500 to 1. We became more earned. Social media campaign, everything that they produced, we would try to counter with facts. And that was kind of our strategy the whole time. The glossy images capture people's attention. People love sports. We certainly do in Boston. It is difficult to make a wonky policy argument, so we had to dilute that into really smart talking points that the average person could understand. You guys have so much wonderful information already, so we're just bowled over by what's happening out in the lobby here. You have such amazing information. You're so far ahead of where we ever were. But they're also being able to activate local people into what that information means and engage them is really important and helpful in the effort. And in terms of the question about money, in terms of advancing the bid, the biggest, most connected, wealthiest, powerful people were advancing the bid in Boston. They were going to raise $75 million to advance the bid, which is enormous money that we also thought could be better spent elsewhere in terms of other core issues like housing, education, etc. But that was big money and illustrated how up against some really powerful interests we were. I don't know if it's helpful.
Well, I've got a question going to the, you talked a little about your critics opposing local governments and their argumentations. What kind of attitude do you have concerning the IOC? And was that also a part of your critique towards the whole bidding process?
So I think it really falls at the feet of the IOC. The IOC is to blame for why the Olympics have not worked out well in other cities. The way that we perceive the process is really as an auction. So the IOC is conducting an auction and they're trying to get as many cities as possible to enter into that auction, to be in that bidding room. And they're going to get the highest possible price that they can get from those cities. And in the case of Munich and in the case of Salt Lake City in the United States, that can literally mean like who can give them the most bags of cash and bags of dollars or euros. But even if it doesn't mean corruption, it can mean a price that is what the IOC is looking for. So they're looking for an event that looks really good on television. They're looking for a very advanced stadium and an advanced athletes village. Those are the things that matter to them. And the problem with this process is not only that it's an auction and that it's going to go to the city that has the highest bid, but that the bidding, in many cases, is not actually being done by the citizens. It's being done by this third party that claims to represent the citizens. So this is especially true in the US, where it's actually a private entity that is doing that bidding and that negotiating with the IOC. And the public is going to be paying for whatever promises are made. So of course the incentives are to continue to bid up that price higher and higher and higher. Until that auction process is changed, we don't think that the IOC is going to get outcomes that are any different from what it's gotten in the past. They talk a lot about Agenda 2020, which is a series of 40 reforms that they made last year, in the fall of last year. If you actually look at those 40 reforms, I believe it's 7 of them deal with the bidding cities themselves. And then there's a whole set that deal with marketing dynamics and with doping and with other issues. But only 7 of them deal with the actual bidding process. And none of those 7 fundamentally change the dynamic. In fact, one of the 7 says this: instead of delivering your bid in person, a hard copy, like a printed out copy in person, you can just send us a PDF email with it. I mean, that might save, $2,000 of a flight to Switzerland or something, or even less from Hamburg, right? So this is not substantial savings that they're talking about. They're really small savings around the edges. Until that process is changed, no city should expect a different outcome, and we think any city should think twice before even entering that bidding.
Okay, so I think what we underlined so far was the fact that when you construct a narrative over Olympics, you have to provide like a positive image in a sense, because you say you are fighting for education, for more democratic governance in the city, and so on and so on. And on the other hand, you have this kind of image of ruined city due to that, and also what we added here, but it was not the most important thing, of course, but we mentioned, of course, corruption scandals which happened in Salt Lake City, in Nagano, in Sochi, And like particular cases like the fact that the Nagano Olympics were so big failure that all the financial documents have been burned by the organizing committee. So we still don't know how much debt did they have after Olympics. So it's in a sense part of this negative image, and also like the argument which we underlined, which was more meritorious, was the fact that they don't take any responsibility. So the city signs the contract where it takes the responsibility for cost overruns, which has to cover together with the organizing committee any difference between estimations in the budget and actual budget. And I think this was one of the things that we underlined, and our local government didn't know about it because they didn't read the contract.
Yeah, I can continue right at the point. I was in a discussion with the Minister for Environmental Affairs, and he talked a lot about that Hamburg will make different games, and for example that they don't want to use cars in the inner city, and so he said we won't build big parking lots near the facilities, near the stadiums. And then after the debate, a person out of the audience told him, because he has read the whole city contract, which was published a few days ago, and he told the minister that there are a lot of points in this contract where they specifically say how big the parking lots has to be, which form the parking lots has, which sporting facility needs which parking lot, and yeah, that he can't do anything about it. He has to accept it, and then the minister had to say, okay, yeah, I didn't read it, but yeah, I'm the head of the sustainability strategy of our bidding process, and so I think that's a very good example of yeah, what the critique is to hand your city off to these few old monarchic Könige in Ottoman people, and yeah, so that's was an aspect that yeah, of course the city, when it signs the contract and you have to pay all the costs and the profits go to IOC and corporations and so on. I think the Olympic lanes was also a good image. We had a brochure, you can find it outside. We had the picture of the Olympic lanes every city has to make, and I think you can, when you look at the streets in Hamburg, you find the bus lane. Then the government says, okay, we will make it a bike city, so you can imagine there will be more bike lanes, and then there also has to be the Olympic lane, and then no street is left. So I think you can imagine that yeah, you aren't able to make what you want because you hand your city off to the specifics of the IOC. And so I think that yeah, that was also a point.
I would also add that if you check the articles on Sochi, on Beijing in 2006, these Olympics were already supposed to be sustainable. The word was there already. And in Beijing they were sustainable ecologically for, I think, 1 or 2 weeks, because the air pollution is back again.
Das IOC, das Olympische Komitee, hat einen einzigen Artikel zu verkaufen, die Olympischen Spiele. Und da gibt es genaue Spielregeln. Und diese Spielregeln, die sind in der Olympischen Charta verankert und im Host-City-Vertrag. Dieser Host-City-Vertrag soll angeblich geändert worden sein. Ich habe ihn überflogen. Aber es sind nur so unwesentliche Dinge drinnen, nämlich das Wichtigste, dass alles ganz genau so durchgeführt werden muss, wie es das Olympische Komitee verlangt. Das ist unverändert. Und es kann auch noch abgeändert werden im Laufe der Vertragsdauer. Und es ist nicht nur der Host City Vertrag, es spricht niemand davon, dass als Anhang, das müssten wir ja da, vielleicht sind auch Studenten aus den rechtswissenschaftlichen Dingen da, der Anhang, die sogenannten Technical Manuals, belaufen sich auf 7000 Seiten. Und da ist nicht nur beschrieben, dass es sehr große Gebäude sind, wie das olympische Dorf aussehen muss. Da steht sogar drinnen, ich würde sagen, da steht die Farbe der Klodecke drinnen. Bis ins allerletzte Detail muss alles so ausgeführt werden. Und ursprünglich hat sich auch Oslo um Winterspiele 2022 beworben. Und den Norwegern war es dann einfach zu blöd, dass da drinnen steht, womit der norwegische König die Mitglieder des Exekutivkomitees des IOC bewirten muss, wenn sie zu ihm kommen. Lachen Sie nicht drüber. Also so die Bewerbung von London 2012 ging, hat Königin Elisabeth diese Mitglieder des Evaluation Komitees persönlich empfangen. Sie empfängt. Und als die dann im Autobus weggefahren sind, ist sie am Balkon gestanden und haben ihnen nachgerufen. Man hat gesagt, das hat die ganze britische Geschichte nicht gegeben. Alles, was ich sage, trägt ich den Wahrheitsbeweis an, Herr Kollege. Ja? Als in Salzburg während der Olympiade 2014 Mitglieder des sogenannten Evaluation Komitees gekommen sind, die festgestellt haben, ob alles stimmt, was in den Bewerbungsunterlagen drinnen steht. Und als der Chef dieses Bewerbungskomitees mit einem Privatflugzeug aus Lausanne eingeflogen ist, wurde er am Flughafen empfangen, man würde sagen, höchstens vom Protokollchef des Landes. Nein, die Ministerpräsidentin persönlich hat diesen Beamten abgeholt. Also man kriegt diesen IOC-Leuten hinten hinein. Ja, und noch eines, weil da gesagt wird, es wird so viel gelogen. Ich habe meinen Vortrag, den ich jetzt, glaube ich, 1000 Mal gehalten habe, an all den Orten in Südbayern, die alle gegen Olympia vor 2 Jahren gestimmt haben, eine Folie gebracht. Da steht drinnen Boston noch nicht, nein, aber es steht drinnen alle Orte, die sich beworben haben, und jeder hat gesagt, das werden die größten Spiele ever. Und in die Wirklichkeit sieht ganz anders aus. Wenn Sie jetzt nach Vancouver schauen, dass da 80.000 Bäume geschlägert wurden, dann ist keine Rede mehr von den größten Spielen.
Ja, gibt es denn weitere Fragen von euch und vom Publikum?
Ich mache es erst auf Deutsch und dann mache ich es auf Englisch.
Über beides, das ist mir Arbeit.
Also ich finde es sehr interessant, dass der Aspekt auch aus den anderen Städten genannt wird, dass so sehr dieses Argument kommt, ja, wir können in unseren Städten nur bestimmte Dinge entwickeln, wenn wir die Olympischen Spiele haben. Also das Beispiel, was Tomasz aus Polen ja genannt hat, wir können irgendwie hier nur was gegen Luftverschmutzung tun, wenn wir Olympische Spiele haben, weil dann kriegen wir von der EU Geld, um gegen die Luftverschmutzung anzugehen. Ich habe dieser Tage im Interview morgens im Deutschlandfunk gehört, wo jemand von der Finanzbehörde aus Hamburg ähnlich formulierte, so nach dem Motto, ja, die Olympischen Spiele sind doch eine super Chance, weil dann können wir endlich mal das und das umsetzen. Resume it in English now. I find it interesting that you're also giving those examples that the Olympic Games are used as in a way that without the Olympic Games we are not anymore able to develop our towns.
But we need this mega event to develop areas in our towns, or that we need this mega event to go on in the development of our cities. And in some way, politicians giving this kind of arguments are saying somehow our public administration is broken down because without the Olympic Games we cannot work anymore. So it's rather a comment, not so much a question, but I find it very interesting that I also hear it from representatives of other towns.
I just have one comment. Like, we used this argument because they said, okay, we need to show the world that we can organize Olympics, and we said, but you are not able to finance toilet paper in the schools. Toilet paper was missing from the schools, like 2013.
Ich weiß nicht genau, aber dazu gleich mal fragen, ob in was für einem Verhältnis das entsteht, die Funds, die man von dem EU oder Staat oder IOS bekommen würde, im Verhältnis zu was man aussieht oder so. Also, ist das
Artur meinte, dass der ganze Profit an das internationale Olympische Komitee geht. Da wollte ich nachfragen, ob es da spezielle Regelungen dazu gibt.
Die Ausrichterstadt verpflichtet sich, ein Riesenspektakel, Olympische Spiele genannt, durchzuführen. Im alten Host-City-Vertrag, der bis zu den letzten Spielen gültig war, ist drinnen gestanden, dass das IOC von den Sponsoren, das ist Dow Chemical, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Omega, Gelder bekommen wird, erstens, und zweitens den größten Teil der Gelder aus den Fernsehrechten stammt. Und da steht dann im Vertrag, dass das IOC einen Teil dieses Geldes nach eigenen Ermessen an die Ausrichterstadt weitergeben wird. Also die Höhe wird nach eigenen Ermessen. Ja. Und dadurch sitzt das IOC immer am längeren Ast, weil die können ja sagen, ihr habt das nicht alles so gemacht, die Klodeckel, die sind jetzt etwas dunkler als vereinbart, also wir können euch nur weniger Geld geben. Im letzten Vertrag, den ich jetzt gestern überflogen habe, steht, glaube ich, drinnen, dass der Ausrichterstadt, nehmen Sie mich nicht mehr vor, ich glaube 850 Millionen bekommt. Außerdem kann die Ausrichterstadt die kann natürlich die Tickets verkaufen für alle Veranstaltungen, muss davon einen Prozentsatz an das IOC abliefern. Die Ausrichterstadt kann Maskottchen machen und muss dafür an das IOC was abliefern. Also all die Dinge, nach denen Sie fragen, die stehen bis ins Letzte in den Bestimmungen drinnen. Mit anderen Worten, Hamburg würde 850 Millionen kosten. Die Spiele würden 850 Millionen vom IOC bekommen und Hamburg würde, das ist so die alte Rechnung, das 3- bis 4-fache dafür ausgeben, nur für die Abwicklung der Spiele, ohne die ganze Infrastruktur. Und die Erfassung der Kosten für die notwendige Infrastruktur ist unerhört schwierig, weil man sagt, naja, man würde ja sowieso jetzt die neue Eisenbahn bauen, die Straßen würde man errichten, die Brücke müsste gebaut werden, die hätte man ja auch ohne Olympische Spiele gebaut. Aber wenn man dann alles zusammenrechnet, dann kommt so wie in Sochi 50 Milliarden US-Dollar raus für die Olympischen Winterspiele. Und da muss ich Ihnen nur als letzten Satz sagen, zurückkommend auf meine Aussage, es wird nirgends so viel gelogen wie bei Olympia. Salzburg hat sich ja um die Spiele auch beworben und wurde dann ausgetrickst, obwohl Salzburg das bessere Konzept gehabt hat als Sochi, das sage ich jetzt als NOlympia-Mensch. Und Salzburg hat reingeschrieben, Olympia 2014 hat die Bewerbergesellschaft reingeschrieben. Olympia 2014 wird den Salzburger Bürger nur 145 Millionen Euro kosten. Und in Sochi hat es dann 50 Milliarden gekostet.
Yeah, in Hamburg, Olaf Scholz says, the mayor says that there won't be any cuts in social and public areas. He promises the people in Hamburg, and he also said now that only 1.2 billion euros will be paid by the city. So from 2016 on, 200 million euros a year, and all the other money from the taxpayers, 6.2 billion, has to come from the federal government. And but the federal government already said, okay. Yeah, it said, oh, we won't build you a city. We help you to help you hosting the Olympic Games more than the last bid. So we will do more, but yeah, we won't pay the whole city. And so now we have a situation that in the end of November there's the referendum, and in February they say, okay, maybe we have the end of the negotiation. Yeah, and to the question that the city says, okay, we only can do specific things, invest money for rational things if we have the Olympic Games. I think there is some chance by saying that, because for all the years now we have this TINA principle. There is no alternative. We have no money. We are sorry, but we have to cut in every sectors of public life. And now you have this direct comparison. You have advisory institutions for homeless people that have to close because of some 10,000 euros on the one hand, and then they say, okay, no, we don't have the money, we can't pay you, and then on the other hand they say, okay, we are able to give 200 million each year, we are able to spend 2.5 billion euros just to get to start building a new city on the island planet Oslo. So I think when we have overcome the Olympic fancy thing, then I think the people will be very skeptical if then again the mayor says, okay, no, I don't have money for childcare, I don't have money for the universities, because it shows that if there is political will, then you can do it. So I think that could be a good thing. I would be interested, this is an aspect maybe in cities where you have already overcome the bid for Olympic Games, that the people maybe, they say, we want more than you are promising us.
Okay, so in case of the first question, which is about the involvement, how much the city was supposed to pay, it's a bit complicated because Krakow itself was not able to organize Winter Olympic Games because it's not in the mountains. So
Beijing is also not.
In Krakow we could have only like hockey, that thing with curling. Yeah, this was the sport that we often used in our discussions, because everyone thinks it's strange in Poland, at least. And they wanted to build like a venue for curling, and nobody does curling in Poland. But there were also cities in the mountains which were supposed to pay part of the budget. But of course, Krakow as the host city was supposed to pay most. And the amount was 500 million euros. It was at that time 10% of the estimated Olympic budget. but as much as 2/3 of Krakow's year budget. So, like for Krakow, it was really much. And your question was if people started to be, and then in fact they used these arguments against us. So they said, okay, because of the Krakow Against Games, we don't have money for infrastructure now. They didn't talk about education. They didn't touch the topic of education, healthcare, but less money for air pollution and so on. So in fact it went a bit other way.
So there's a joke in English, I'm sure there's something similar in German, which is the best way to become a millionaire is to start as a billionaire. And I think that's a good lesson for cities that are bidding on the Olympics. The IOC is going to give you some money. In fact, in Boston, they were going to give us about $1.5 billion. But to get the $1.5 billion, you have to spend another $9 or $10 billion of our own dollars. So it's not a very good deal that the IOC is offering. There's 4 budgets that you need to think of when you think of an Olympics. The first is the operating budget. The next is the budget for permanent venues and facilities. The third is the budget for infrastructure. And the fourth is the budget for security. And I think here in Hamburg, they've broken it down in basically the same way. The IOC only contributes to the first bucket, not to the other 3. So they only contribute to the operations budget. And they actually say that you can't use IOC dollars for permanent venues. You can only use them for temporary venues. So if the plan is to have permanent facilities to some extent, then that's going to be paid from public dollars or other sources that are not from the IOC. If you look just at that operating budget, in Boston, the estimated budget was about $5 billion. And again, the IOC was only going to contribute $1.5 billion of that. The other sources were tickets, and some of that would be new money. On the other hand, if there are people from the region or from the city who are buying those tickets, that might mean that they're buying a ticket to the Olympics and not buying a ticket to the football game or to the theater or to the movies. So it's not necessarily new economic activity. Another part of that budget are T-shirts and buttons, so selling things related to the games with the Olympic logo on it. And then finally, there's just pure sponsorship. So some of that might be corporations, and that might include corporations from other parts of Germany that would contribute to Hamburg. But it also might mean local corporations that are taking their charitable dollars that would otherwise go to important issues in the city and instead are going to the Olympics. And that's happened in other cities, in particular in the United States and Atlanta, where local charities had less money because the people that normally gave them money instead gave it to the Atlanta Olympic Committee so that they could meet their operating budget. So this is not a windfall of new dollars from the IOC. They are only giving you a limited amount. And we've sort of brought this up in the conversation, but this was one of our most important talking points when you think about the budget. And that's that the IOC in that contract is requiring the host city to essentially sign a blank check. Essentially to say, we will make up any deficits in any of those 4 budgets. If you need dollars, at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones that are going to spend those dollars. And so the risk or the exposure for the host city is essentially infinite. It's billions and billions of euros. And the IOC is not taking any of that risk. They are pushing all of that risk onto the host city. They do not take any responsibility. Once they give you that amount of money that they're going to give you, it's not going to go up. It might go down because they may say you didn't meet all your requirements, but it's not going to go any higher.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I saw 2 arms up, one over there and one in the back. But before that, I wanted to broaden and maybe open the discussion also to you a little bit with a little quote by Christopher Gabney. I don't know if that is maybe you know. He's a doctor of geography and wrote a lot about the Olympic Games at Rio de Janeiro in 2016 and the impact. And he said, no more Olympic Games, full stop. Not in Hamburg, not in Rome, not in Boston. And what we're thinking about is how to form an international movement out of those local movements we had before. And also, how to develop another view on the cities, because as we all had the arguments like, okay, we're going to get some good infrastructure and we have some cuts, so we need to work with that. What kind of idea have we got that we could develop instead of the Olympic Games? So, but still asking questions.
Do your campaigns for better education, better transport, better healthcare, and better housing have continuity over the point where you reach that the application is taken back? And how did you come to continuity in this social fight? And auf Deutsch Ihre Auseinandersetzung oder deine Auseinandersetzung also bessere Gesundheitsversorgung, bessere Bildung, bessere Verkehrsmöglichkeiten, Bildungsmöglichkeiten, die auch über den Tag dessen, wo diese Olympiabewerbung zurückgezogen wurde, Kontinuität hatten und wie das erreicht werden konnte. Also weil
Auseinandersetzung mit wem?
Mit dem Land, mit den Firmen, mit den Sponsoren, a struggle against whom? The corporations, the IOC, the government, those who oppose social progressions.
In the next round, I'll cover you up. Yeah, okay.
Hello. Well, there's the time when you discuss Olympian people and you finally had all the arguments and they agree with you, but there still comes one point. They say, yeah, but we are going to do it better than any other city on the world, and so we still have to do it. How would you respond to these, annoying arguments at the end of the discussion?
So that is a hard argument, and Boston is a city with a lot of pride. We are very proud of our history, we're very proud of the things that we've accomplished and the things that we can do. And the proponents of the games did a good job of appealing to that pride. We tried to also appeal to Bostonians' pride. So we pointed out that we have the Boston Marathon every year, which is one of the most famous marathons in the world. We have the Boston Red Sox, who have been a very successful baseball team. We have the New England Patriots, who have won 4 World Series in the last 10 years. So we wanted to show that we had just as much pride in the city, and that, of course, if Boston put its mind to the games, it could pull off a good Olympics. But the question is not, can the city do it? The question is, should the city do it? And the answer to the question about should was very clearly no. And that's how we sort of moved that argument. On the question of what has our movement become since the decision. So the decision was a little over 2 months ago, and I think it's not completely clear what we will do moving forward. The coalition of people that supported us was a very diverse coalition. So we had kind of traditional, progressive, left-leaning liberal groups, but we also had conservative groups. You may have heard politically of the Tea Party in the United States, very right-wing. We worked with them, and they were supporting us just the same way that very progressive labor groups were. So it's not clear that on the next issue that I choose or Kelley chooses or others choose that we're going to have that full coalition. If we want to raise taxes to support transit, we may have the left side, but we may not have the right side with us. But what I do think happened with our effort is it reminded people in Massachusetts that it is possible for a small group of people that are really committed to an idea to come up from the grassroots and really challenge very powerful business and institutionalized interests in the city. It became a David versus Goliath story with the discussion of getting outspent 1,500 to 1 with many of Boston's most powerful people supporting the bid. The fact that citizens groups could push that idea aside for the ideas they really wanted, I think was powerful, and I think that will live on as a reminder to people that in a democracy they really do have an ability to make an impact and make a difference. And then finally on this question of kind of no Olympics anywhere, the modern Olympic movement really started in 1896, and it was this guy, Pierre de Coubertin, who was a Parisian, who had it first in Athens in 1896. And that Games in 1896, they built all these venues, all these new venues that they didn't really need. They had massive cost overruns, just like every Olympics since has had. And the Greek government said to Pierre de Coubertin, okay, we built all this stuff. Let us have it every 4 years. We want to have it in 1900, 1904, 1908. Just build it once and you can have it there. But Pierre de Coubertin had two reasons why he didn't want that to be the case. The first is that he was from Paris, and he wanted to see the games in Paris, in his hometown. And so that's what he was pushing for. The second is that this is an era where if you want to share the Olympics with other parts of the world, it's sort of the World's Fair model. You kind of have to move it around to different cities. That would be the only way for someone in North America or in South America or in Asia to experience the games is moving into their city. And that's in 1896. Since 1896, we have invented the radio, the television, the internet, air travel. Right? It's much more possible to experience the Olympic Games anywhere they are in the world. And in fact, 99.9% of people who experience the Olympic Games do it on a TV screen or a computer screen. So the case that the Olympics need to move around to different cities is not a very strong one today. It would make a lot more sense to have it in one city and have the 99.9% of people that engage with it watch it on TV, and then the 0.1% that want to go and see it in person can get on a plane and they can go see it in that one city. So I think that may be the solution. I think it's going to be difficult to convince the IOC to get rid of the games entirely, but I think that the more people talk about updating this model, this is it. The IOC is pushing a 19th century business model in the 21st century world. It's time for a change.
But how big would the bribe be if they make a bid for one city to have Olympics for 100 or more? My answer to the first question about if we continue the struggle, yes, we were very optimistic after we won the referendum, because in Poland you usually don't win referendums because the voters' turnout is too small. It has to be 30% of citizens. It's much as for Poland, but the referendum was at the same time as Euro parliamentary elections, so we somehow made it like 35%. And after the referendum, we decided to form a committee to start in local elections. And we had, of course, demands in all these spheres we mentioned today. And we got 6.7% of votes, which was quite much as for this kind of committee without, almost without any money, because we got, in fact, biggest amount of small donations from people, around 400, while usually, like most political actors in Krakow got like 20 donations, but bigger ones. And at the moment, some of us got involved in let's say, Polish Podemos. We have a new political party from May, which is starting in parliamentary elections, which will be next this Sunday in Poland. And there is a chance that they will get into parliament. They have at the moment 5% of votes, and we will have one left-wing party finally in Polish parliament.
So I think the question from this direction and the question what is the perspective, NO2024, they are connected because I think that every time a person says, okay, yeah, I know all your points of critique, they are right. I agree with you on this point, this points of critique. But wouldn't Hamburg be the less bad option instead of giving it a third time to Beijing, for example? And yeah, I think you can confront this argument with the perspective that you say, okay, we need to free the Olympic idea from the IOC, and we need one process, one bidding process where there is no city left that says, okay, IOC, come to my city and we sell it to you. So I think, yeah, the IOC has to make this experience to, yeah, really rethink of what they are doing and yeah, pushing the pressure on the IOC that games are made democratic, that they have social impact, they're not that against each other and so on. So I think the perspective of NO2024 is really a very ambitious aim, of course, but I think that is the only solution when you look at the structures that are very the same like the FIFA and so on. So I think that is a good idea to do that, and I think sharing the experiences and collaborate with the different anti-Olympic movements as we did now, for example, by organizing this Congress. We had Skype calls to London, to Paris. They are forming their anti-Olympic committee this weekend or this or next weekend. So I think if you stay together, make maybe resolutions together, come together and say, okay, we have really a different idea of what Olympic Games, the Olympic idea should be. So I think that's very a very good perspective.
I will just add one point that if you answer this question about like better Olympics or sustainable Olympics, you can say, but like this is the essence of mega project, that they cannot be really controlled, and then you can list the statistics, the stabilization of finances, the stabilization of housing, rents and prices, and so on and so on. So like the Olympics as a mega project cannot be sustainable. The only Olympics I think we can imagine is not a mega project, which means the idea, I think, of organizing it in one city where you have the infrastructure, and in fact you don't have to, there is no like huge capital influx which makes which brings problems, in fact.
Martin Müller, professor from Zurich, he talks of that point of the mega event syndrome, he calls it. So tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Wie lautet der Titel dieser Veranstaltung? Anführungszeichen, wie gelingt uns das Ende der IOC-Bereicherungen? Ein Schritt von mir, ein Vorschlag vor 2 Jahren, als die Bewerbung von München den Bach hinuntergegangen ist. Wir haben gegründet Olympia-freie Alpen. Dass wir zumindest hier alle Städte, alle Orte quasi an den Pranger stellen wo in den Alpen der Wunsch aufkommt, einen Zirkus zu machen. Das zum einen. Man sieht ja, dass die Olympiade jetzt in die gebirgige Gegend von Beijing gegangen ist, die ursprünglich in Garmisch-Patenkirchen und Berchtesgaden hätte ausgetragen werden sollen. Also das IOC, ich muss anders anfangen. Ich halte jetzt seit 10 Jahren Vorträge über Bewerbungen und über das IOC. Da habe ich immer eine Folie drinnen und das ist der momentane Stand des IOC-Kontos. Und den kann man ganz einfach aus der Buchhaltung, die haben eine sehr ordentliche Buchhaltung, ihr hättet da Freude damit, und die wird veröffentlicht, man muss nur wissen, wo man sie auf der IOC-Seite findet, ist von Rechnungsprüfern beglaubigt etc. Und die einzige Änderung, die ich auf dieser Folie durchführe, ist, dass ich immer nach 2 Jahren noch einen höheren Balken habe. Und ich habe schon gesagt, dass jetzt sind die Geldbestände über 3 Milliarden Dollar. Die liegen auf der Bank in der Schweiz oder wo auch immer. Und wie soll man jetzt das Ende dieser IOC-Bereicherungen herbeiführen? Solange sich immer wieder Städte bewerben, weil sie aus dem Hintergrund zu den Bewerbungen gedrängt werden. Also man müsste zumindest auch hier in Hamburg damit mal anfangen und zeigen, auch die Hamburger Bürger wollen Olympia nicht haben. Dann wäre das wieder ein sehr deutliches Zeichen. Berlin hat man nicht genommen und jetzt ist Hamburg auch dagegen. Und was hier zuvor gefallen ist, all die Dinge, die nur kommen werden, wenn Olympia durchgeführt wird. Also man sollte jeden Politiker sofort mit einem Stock in die Wüste jagen, der sagt, ja, wir kriegen die neue Brücke und wir kriegen das und das nur, wenn Olympia kommt. Und wir kriegen das Geld von der EU nur dann, wenn Olympia kommt. Bitte denken Sie daran, jeder Euro kann nur einmal ausgegeben werden. Der fehlt an anderer Stelle.
That is to answer you and Ingman.
So I have a question to Tomasz. I don't know much about Krakow, but I read on Wikipedia that you have 4 questions in the Olympic referendum, and the most voters vote for yes for new bicycle roads. So my question is, why was that? Because I think if we gonna ask the citizens of Hamburg, do you want new bicycle roads or do you want huge sport buildings in the middle of nowhere and in the Hamburg? So I think the majority will answer yes to the new bicycle roads than to the huge sports stadiums. Yeah. So one question is, was it part of your strategy to convince the minority to vote no to the Olympic Games and yes for the new bicycle roads, or was it like the government used this connection between the public investments in the social and public parts in the city to the Olympic Games? Because I think they know about the impact will have if we convince the majority of people that we need this investment in the social structure than the Olympic Games. So I think that's why they use this connection, and we have to divide this connection. And to Chris and Kelley, I have the question to the opportunity cost argument, because I know this term from the economics, and if I understood it right, it's like it's not only the 11.2 billion euros that get lost in the applied process of Hamburg. It's also the time the government wastes on this Olympic Games thing. So my question is, how do you handle it with the people on the street, or how can you deepen this argument? Because an den Kollegen aus Salzburg nochmal auf Deutsch. Ich glaube, dass es eine Zeit, als jetzt Hamburg sich die Entscheidung gefallen ist, dass Stadt Hamburg sich aus Deutschland auf die Olympischen Spiele bewerben soll, haben wir als Neuer nochmal mit auseinandergesetzt und fand, dass das ziemlich deutlich war, dass die Olympischen Spiele einen Schaden bringen. Und daraus sind, ich glaube, dass ich eine Zeit lang den Konflikt, den man eigentlich mit den Gegnern, die man hat, ja auch unterschätzt habe, mit den Emotionen und mit den Vorwürfen, die sagen alle Sportmuffel oder man sei nicht dafür, dass Hamburg irgendwie in der Welt strahlt oder weiß ich nicht was. Und ich glaube, dass ich das manchmal unterschätzt habe und ich wollte fragen, wie Sie jetzt in 10 Jahren noch auseinandersetzen mit so einem starken Gegner, IOC sozusagen auch Fortschritte erlebt haben oder damit auch mit diesen Vorwürfen sich auseinandergesetzt haben, die auch einem aus sozusagen potenziellen Mitstreitern manchmal vorgetragen werden.
No, ich mache das auch erst auf Deutsch und dann auf Englisch, versuche ich zumindest. Und zwar eine Frage, das wundert mich etwas. Es ist so, ich bin aktiver Sportler, aber nicht in einem Profiverein, sondern in einem Verein, das ist nur eine Amateurabteilung. Und der Hamburger Sportbund, der unterstützt die Olympiabewerbung. Allerdings auch Vereine wie meiner, der überhaupt keine Profiabteilung hat. Meine erste Frage ist, warum ist das wohl so? Ich weiß es nicht. Meine zweite Frage ist, wie kann man dagegen argumentieren? Now I'll try it in English. I'm doing sports sectors in a purely amateur fine. This woman, because this club supports the Bewerbung, but I wonder why it does. And the second question is, how can I do good arguments to counter this?
Habe ich Ihre Frage richtig verstanden? Wie stehe ich zu meinem Kampf gegen eine Bewerbung, sagen wir jetzt 2006, jetzt kommen fast 10 Jahre danach. Wie stehe ich zu diesem Kampf, dass ich mitgeholfen habe, die Olympiade in Salzburg zu verhindern? Ist das so? Oder? Ich will vielleicht so antworten. Kein Mensch spricht mehr am Tag danach, wenn die Bewerbung abgelehnt wurde, wenn eine andere Stadt gewählt wurde. Das Leben geht weiter. Nummer 1 und Nummer 2 sage ich, während des ganzen Kampfes, da ist ein ganz hoher politischer Funktionär der Landeshauptstadt Salzburg, ich kann es ruhig sagen, der Oberbürgermeister, der war gleichzeitig Aufsichtsratsvorsitzender der Bewerbungsgesellschaft. Wenn uns der entgegengekommen ist am Gehsteig meiner Frau und mir, dann hat er den Gehsteig gewechselt, dass er nicht will. Und kaum war das vorbei, kommt er her, klopft mir auf die Schulter. Sind wir froh, dass wir Olympia nicht bekommen haben.
Okay, I'll talk about the opportunity cost argument. That was a huge reason why I got involved to begin with. It's a great argument to make. You can't change bad facts. Every Olympics goes over budget, and this is an invasion of the International Olympic Committee coming in and dictating the terms of your community and redirecting really precious, scarce tax resources towards a velodrome versus education or affordable housing. Making that persuasive argument to people really makes a difference. It makes an impact. We're lucky we have toilet paper in our bathrooms in our schools, but there's a lot of other really critical issues that we are facing. And to link that to people, to see that this was being pushed by these very wealthy to very privileged people versus the philosophy that there's still so many people struggling in Boston just to make, ends meet. We had to connect to those folks and tell them that this was going to be a distraction. And I'll give you one quick example. Our governor commissioned a report to study this bid and say, is this going to be a good idea or not? And in the short time that this has happened in Boston, that was $250,000, that report, for that outside group to analyze it. And that's $250,000 not going towards education or housing or healthcare. It's going to issue a report about the Olympics. So the slippery slope had already begun just this year, and you compound that year after year, think of how many precious, scarce resources aren't going to core issues in your city that are going towards Olympic development projects. So that was a critical piece to our argument.
Yeah, I think not everyone is going to understand the opportunity cost argument, but a sophisticated audience will. And then if it's just someone on the street and you need to talk to them quickly, it's just as simple as, no, I'm not for the Olympics, or I'm opposed to the Olympics, but I'm for housing, better housing. I'm for better bike lanes. I'm for better transportation, whatever it is. Just to remind people that you can still be very pro Hamburg. You still can be very optimistic about the future of the city. You don't want to see that city, your city's future go in the wrong direction because you take the wrong path. On the question of club sports or physical activity, so every Olympic bidding committee will say that one of their reasons for pushing the games is because they want to inspire young people and people in the entire city to be more active and to participate in sport. And there is no evidence that having Olympics in your city does that. In the UK, the participation rates in Olympic sports are actually lower now than they were before the Olympics in 2012. So there is just no evidence of that. And I think that might be one point to make with your teammates in the club sports. One simple way to sort of summarize that is, if your goal is to get people active and get them engaged in activities and get them moving around, you don't build a stadium where 60,000 people sit.
So, with respect to referendum questions, it's a bit complicated, but I will try to clarify. There were 4 questions. One about building a subway in Krakow, which makes no sense and it's more expensive than Olympics. Second, about giving more money without specifying how much for bike lanes. Third, about the whole monitoring of the city, monitoring system. So, what I suppose, we were fighting for one question to be there. What I suppose was the idea of civic platform, which was in favor of Olympics and proposed these questions, was to have another mega project, subway, but in order to not to have only subway and Olympics, you have to put bike lanes because it's very cheap to build them, and monitoring because they like it. So this was like extra input that they wanted to say, and we will do it after elections, like these bike lanes, which is like, now we have more spending on green areas and bike lanes, but nothing changed in, I would say, spheres which would change the logic of the city working, like housing, education, like public services in general, I would say. And in case of the question about support from sports for people who like sport, first of all, we were criticized, and the politicians were saying Tomasz doesn't looks like he's not really like doing much of he's not a sports person, yeah. Which is in fact partly true. But I always said what I'm writing a bike. What I believe would and was in fact our response was to make this division between professional and amateur sport, and to show that professional sport is financed at the expense of the amateur sport, and to show also that people start involvement in sport through amateur clubs, which are underfinanced. And it was also at the same time we had cuts in amateur sport in Krakow, which was like very cheap to finance, and the school clubs were closed and so on.
Just one example, in Hamburg there's a swimming pool in the city, part of the city St. Pauli, and it's not opened on Sundays because it would cost 3,000 euros each Sunday to open it. So that's the loss each day to open it. And so I think that's a good, you compare it, the amount of money they say we will build new stadiums, but we don't have 3,000 euros that people can swim or have affordable tickets. So I think it's clear between the professional sports and the amateur sports.
Ich weiß nicht, ob es jetzt schon zum Schlusswort kommt, aber über den quasi Seminarcharakter dieser Veranstaltung hinaus möchte ich doch einen Appell an Sie richten. Einmal, es sitzen hier fast lauter Gegner von Olympia, Gegner von Hamburg Olympia. Sie sollten trachten, dass Veranstaltungen zustande kommen, die nicht nur für die Gegner gemacht werden, sondern hauptsächlich für die Unentschlossenen, dass ihnen also Information gegeben wird, Hilfe gegeben wird. Und zweitens, und das geht also hier an die Veranstalter oder vielleicht sind auch von den anderen Hamburger Gruppen Führungsköpfe da, man sollte eine Führungsfigur aufbauen, den Mr. oder die Mrs. NOlympia. Das wäre sehr wichtig und man sollte unbedingt versuchen, was ist da so lustig? Geht das nicht? Ja. Nein, ich spreche hier aus meiner Erfahrung von München und von Garmisch. In Garmisch war eine Führungsfigur, das war der Oberförster Axel Döring. Und was der gesagt hat, das hat man ihm geglaubt. Der ist seriös aufgetreten und es hat nicht Nebengruppen gegeben, beziehungsweise diese Nebengruppen oder anderen Gruppen, die haben ihn unterstützt. Und das Gleiche war in München. Und da war von der Fraktion der Linken über den Bund Naturschutz, es waren also 12 oder 15 Organisationen, aber alle unter dem Namen NOlympia München. Und da haben die doch etwas Respekt davon vor uns gehabt. Also meine Empfehlung für Sie, mit einer Stimme reden und eine Führungsfigur aufbauen und zu versuchen, dass viele Leute zu dieser Abstimmung stehen und dass sie dagegen stimmen. Denn wenn man dann mit positivem Ergebnis nach Kuala Lumpur im Jahr 2017 hinfährt und ihr bekommt die Olympiade, dann habt ihr 6 Jahre, 7 Jahre eine große Unruhe in der Stadt und es ist in vielen Gebieten eine rechtsfreie Zone.
So, das ist jetzt erstmal auch eine ganze Menge und ich glaube, kann heute Abend auch vom Thema her gar nicht erschöpfen werden, aber I just changed in German. I don't know why I did that. Sorry guys. So that was just the starting point, and I think the whole discussion, in fact, just started from now on. And well, we hopefully can develop the whole discussion in the next days during the conference, and yeah, gladly he will stay here for some time. And yeah, what I still want to ask you for is maybe for some last words or a little look up where it leads to, and just for you guys, if you get some little questions afterwards, you can just come to the front and ask them in private afterwards. Okay, but yeah.
So thank you again for the invitation to join you in Hamburg and to talk tonight. I think as Kelley and I have been here for the last few days, we really have seen so many similarities between what's happening here and what happened in Boston. The types of cities, the types of people that live in those cities, the way that the process is being conducted by the pro side being very untransparent and not engaging the no side. The pro side having lots of power and lots of money against the no side that's underfunded and doesn't come from necessarily traditional places of power. But I think Boston is an example where we really did win. We really did overcome that pro campaign and demonstrated to people that this was not going to be the right thing for our city. It was very clear from the polling that the more people learned about the bid, the less they liked it. And so your job over the next month in particular, but even after, if the ballot is not successful for the no side, is to continue to put out very good information about what the Olympics are and what they would mean for Hamburg. And we can continue to do that. You're already doing a very good job of it, but we can continue to do that in the months and years ahead. You will be successful, and you will be able to prevent the Olympics from coming to Hamburg, and instead you'll be able to focus individually and collectively and as a city on the things that you all find much, much more important to improving your daily lives and your families and your colleagues and your friends. So continue to fight very hard, and you will be successful at this.
So, like, the bad thing is that it seems for me after I talked to you that your political leads, your economical leads, your construction companies, real estate companies, your media are in favor and are well organized and consolidated. It was not the case in Krakow. The good thing is that it's always easier to mobilize people who are against Olympics. They will go to the referendum. They have the conviction that it's important. Then to have this kind of boring campaigns in buses like you said, with some pictures and so on. These are not, I wouldn't say, these are not images which mobilize people. They rather don't believe it. They don't care so much. So like the task for the next for you until the referendum is to try, especially to demobilize people who can decide to go and vote for. If you don't have media, then you have to do it on the streets. So we had media, we were happy about that.
But just one point, I don't think the other side is too clever, because there's an image video now, it's a big debate on the internet. It was produced by one of the most famous advertising movie makers in Hamburg, and they made a movie with 45 men and just 4 women, and they were just hushing over the screen, and yeah, now they are said, oh, it was not on purpose, and we will cut women back in. So even if they have the money, they have the power, they are systemic stupid, I would say. But yeah, that's one point, and maybe I don't know. I say maybe we can say that the discussion about the Olympic Games hopefully is one of like the end game between neoliberal austerity policy with mega events for the rich and cuts for the people in the city, and I hope that when we overcome the Olympic Games, then we can do a lot better things.
Noch ein Schlusswort. Ja, dann heißt dieses Schlusswort nur, alle, die Sie da sitzen, morgen 14 Uhr, Raum 7. Ich habe mich sehr gefreut, mit Ihnen diskutieren zu dürfen.
Vielen Dank auch nochmal von mir. Wer jetzt wirklich noch sehr viel Interesse hat, gerne hierher kommen, nochmal sprechen und vielleicht finden wir noch einen Ort, wo wir sonst auch noch weiter diskutieren können.
So, thanks a lot. I know you guys came a long way here and took your time, so I think that's worth a great applause. Thank you for encouraging us and joining the fight against our Olympic Games here.